Welcome back to PedalBox, and it's finally time to get this beast back together with some new discs, rebuild the whole front corner, and do one of my least favourite jobs on a car, replacing CV joints and CV boots. This is probably going to get messy, and I'm going to be really miserable doing it, but it'll be worth it to get this ready for the MOT. Now, it has been quite a while since we worked on this. The driveway is not conducive to working in the snow, the wind and these sub-zero temperatures that we've had this winter. So now it's brightened up a little bit, it's no longer snowing, and it's about 10 degrees, which really isn't too bad for middle of January. We can get back on and get all of this together and get the new hub in. Now, if you haven't seen the previous episode where we installed this hokey Rexton spring onto the Rodius, you should definitely go and have a look at that. We had some help from a friend called Jeff down at CMC Workshop, and he also helped me with doing the bearing because I don't have a big press to get this out, and even his 20-ton press was on the edge trying to extract this bearing, so it was definitely in there and rusted pretty well in. So we managed to get that out. Let's take a quick look at that and come back and get on with the worst job in cars.
Closer inspection of the bearing shows a good deal of crustiness all over the snap ring and what looks like a really unhappy bearing with a deformed shield. With the bearing out, confirmation this thing was cooked. There's rust and debris throughout, the grease looks burnt and almost like dark chocolate smeared around the edge and into the outer race. Even the face of the outer race looks unevenly worn and rusty. All in all, it's a pretty sorry looking bearing and a good job we did this while we had it apart. Some quick cleanup ready for the snap ring to go back in, and it's time to fit the new bearing. The old bearing is as good as anything to push the new bearing in without ruining it. One edge is ground down so it's slightly smaller than the hub face, that way there's no risk that the old one might get stuck once we install the new one all the way in. Unfortunately, the new bearing kit didn't come with a snap ring, which is a bit of an oversight as far as I'm concerned, so the old one got cleaned up and reinstalled. Fortunately, it didn't get mangled when we took it out, and a couple of taps and it's seated nicely back into the housing, and we're ready to reinstall the centre of the hub.
So now we're on to my least favourite thing on vehicles, which is CV grease. Like, some people say gear oil, diff oil is bad. CV grease, for me, is worse. I hate it more than Anakin hates sand. In the first episode you saw how much CV grease was launched out the back of this through this tiny little hole just on the outside edge of the CV joint, and it caked everything and it just made the whole process miserable. And sure enough, packing this with CV grease is going to be exactly as miserable. I'm not taking the joint apart. I don't want to disturb this. I found every time I've tried to dismantle an axle and remove a joint, it's gone badly. I've just had to put a new one on the end and move on because these inevitably don't come off cleanly and they just break apart, and it's just not worth the hassle of doing it twice. So it's worth just putting a new one on if you're going to take it apart, which I'm not. Because we're not going to take that apart, we now need to fit this new boot, this universal stretchy one, over the joint and onto the axle. I need to make sure I put it on that way round and not stretch it that way round, because I've definitely not done that before, but it is definitely not a fun process trying to stretch this out. So I bought a universal kit that comes with an installation tool. Unfortunately, I'm probably going to have to blur this installation tool out, because, well, yeah, damn. So this is going to be a masterclass in how not to remove one of these. To install it, you fold the tabs over and then you pinch this to make it grip around the whole side. But to get it apart is an absolute nightmare. I never have much luck doing this, and I don't think I'm going to have much luck doing it this way again. So you're just going to have to endure this absolute masterclass, as I say, in the worst way to remove one of these clamps. If you know a better way to do this, please tell me, but this is pretty much why these clamps are not reusable. That is definitely not to say I haven't reused these before, because I have, and it was awful. But let's see how far we can get. First screwdriver is done with. Go to a bigger one and just try and put enough slack in this that for what we're doing here, we might actually get away with it. Now I'm reluctant to go and get the angle grinder to just cut this apart, but that might be the winning move once we get further down and realise that this is absolutely not going to work any other way. But in the meantime, let's try it. Let's just try and break this apart. Now I've got into the end underneath, I can get something in to try and lift these two tabs up or peel this over the tab one way or the other. Okay, that's one of them off. Very nearly out of the way. That's one through. This might actually work, and weirdly this is the best this has ever gone. I don't like that this is the best this has ever gone, but I will take every single win that I can get when dealing with these, because it is such a hateful, hateful process. Maybe this is going easier because I'm being significantly more destructive than I would normally be, but as I have new clamps to go on, I don't care about how bad this one gets. So the fact that that's all torn apart really doesn't bother me. One more to do right inside here, and that is going to be more of a nightmare. Well, all things considered, we've got away with this reasonably well. There's a decent amount of grease in and around the bearings. I think with this hole being fairly small, it has only ejected the excess grease rather than letting any detritus get in. So we're definitely, well, I say definitely, we are hopefully correct that we don't have to replace this CV joint. I didn't hear any noise from it, any knocking, anything else when I was driving this down here from Adrian's, so I am reasonably happy that this joint at least is okay. I'm going to take out as much of this grease as I possibly can though and put fresh stuff in. Not least because it actually looks an awful lot like lithium grease rather than CV grease. The new stuff that I have is black. So I'm just going to grab a bunch of this and wipe off as much as possible of the old stuff, because we might as well get rid of as much of the old as we can if we're going to replace it with new and fresh. So I'll just try and get this around. I must admit, I haven't Googled to see whether or not CV grease and lithium grease are wholly incompatible with one another. I'm just going to pretend like I didn't see that, didn't think of the idea, and move on. And if we do have to replace this again in the future, I might just see if Jeff can help me out with that.
And now the worst part, the part that I have been dreading all of this time. Slathering everything in CV grease and trying to get the new boot onto the cone ready to slide it over the top of the CV joint itself.
The problem is whenever you let up, it springs back. Oh my god.
Everything is wrong with this. I hate every single bit of it. Okay, I wonder actually if I can cut this down to make it smaller.
Do you want to risk it?
Not really. Not if I don't have to.
I hated every single minute of doing this, and I probably made it worse by trying to get the boot out beyond the taper onto the flat side with the spreader already over the end of the drive shaft. It was really optimistic, and in the end it was just moving around way too much, and with my fingers inside the boot trying to push the narrow end down as firmly as possible, it just moved around and they were getting trapped as the diameter increased and pinched them against the CV boot itself.
That is quite incredible.
Material science is incredible, kids. God.
Oh, it's so close.
Don't you dare turn inside out.
Inside out would be fine.
Okay, just give it a second.
Yeah.
give it time to relax.
I suddenly have an appreciation for the unflaring section at the end, so once it's there, it will stay put.
Yeah. Which is why I didn't really want to cut it down.
Yeah. Alright.
Oh my god. That is...
That said, when it finally went over, I was absolutely amazed it didn't just split right down the middle. I guess it was designed to do exactly this, so I really shouldn't have been surprised, but it was still so unnatural to see and amazing that it actually did it. I was just stunned.
And we don't actually even need to cut this down, which is even better, so that's another big plus, but wow. Now we've got the cover on, I want to seal up the axle end rather than the joint end to make sure that all of the grease that I put in goes in. It doesn't slide down along the axle because I have to clean that off anyway, so I've got the new band clamp to go on the back. This one's slightly different than the one we took off. The one we took off has these two little tabs that you basically push through the slots. Well, I can't really easily do it because I've mangled this one too badly, but you push it through the slots, fold it over, and that's what retains it, and then what gives it the tightness, as I say, is you just pinch these down, which is what we very much destroyed. This is the one that I'm a little bit more used to, which has three little teeth that as you run round, lock in, and then you pinch it in the same way, and that pulls it in tight, so it holds it onto the axle and makes a good seal around the end. So we just need to put one of these on. Now in the past, I've closed this down using like the end pliers, so they come in and they just pinch down like that, which is very much not the tool, but you can just about make them work if you're careful. Fortunately, one of the things I got for Christmas was a proper pair of pliers, which are very similar to a pair of end-on, like blacksmith tongs kind of style, but properly made for tightening up these clamps. So we're going to get the back one on, pack this full of grease, and then get the front one on and start putting the rest of this together.
Getting the first clamp on was fairly easy, but with the caliper in the way that Chris is holding back, my arms in the way of the camera and reaching around the CV joint in the boot, you really can't see anything at all. So I'll do a much better demonstration when we do the outer boot in a little while, as well as demonstrating how these pliers actually crimp down and keep the band attached onto the CV boot.
Now I just have to pack this full of the new grease, which, yeah, I've already said how much I really hate doing this. It's just terrible, but it has to be done, so I'm just going to pack it in at the top side. So that is now chock full. So we've got the last clamp ready to go on. It's seated in the groove, but before I put it all the way in, you can see how these little teeth interact, and they hold it in under tension like that, and then you just pinch that down. And this is the tool. So it has two little teeth that go into either side of it there, and then this center plate is loose, but all it's meant to do is to hold it down so that it doesn't squeeze up in a big loop, and it actually kind of folds in underneath itself. It's quite a neat little design. You have to apply pressure down onto the joint, which admittedly is a little bit difficult right now because of how it's sat on here. Just put a tiny bit of preload on. I can reposition this, and then we'll go again. Are these side? Nope, it's omnidirectional. And we just snug that up that way. And now this is sat in the groove, and then we can just hammer this down just to make it a little bit flatter, and then the whole thing should be completely sealed, and we can move on to rebuilding this corner of the car. Now before we put the hub on, we can reconnect the anti-roll bar, and that's one less thing we have to reach around the back of the hub to try and see what we're doing. So we've got the other side jacked up so it lifts the anti-roll bar out the way, so we can fit this in. Chris is just going to lower it down, and this should drop straight through, and then we can just put the bushings back on, tighten this down, and that's one less thing that we need to do once it's reassembled. So Chris, if you can just lower that away now.
Cool.
That's that in there. Put them on, get that on, and we can just tighten those down in a minute once we get the rattle gun back out, and it's all good. Fab.
Putting the hub back on went about as well as could be expected. Everything fit back together properly, just as planned, and the worst part was actually just holding it all up whilst aligning the various bolts and pins. Fortunately, this was a lot easier with Chris to help. I'm sure this would have been more of a pain on my own, although still doable. It's always nice to have a helping hand. Before the bolts went back in though, we went through all of the threads and cleaned them up with a wire wheel and ran a tap through the various nuts to get rid of any dirt and corrosion. The first one we tried on the ball joint seemed oddly tight, so this seemed prudent, and sure enough, everything went back together much easier after we did this. Fitting the disc was pretty trivial, and the only real difficulty we had after that was getting the caliper off the carrier to put the new pads in.
Well, we bolted the caliper back onto the hub only because we need to get the carrier bolts out on the caliper themselves, and they are unbelievably stiff. Holy crap, why is this like this? Just going to question myself.
You're going the right way.
Definitely undoing it. God. I really shouldn't have to get the breaker bar on to undo
a 14.
The slider bolts. That is... Okay, it's going. Feels like it's popped at least. There we go.
Yeah, that's done.
Cool. Right. Now, this should... Oh, not if I tighten it again. Now, this should actually just come off. Now the pads are pretty good. There's at least 50% of the material left. Compare them to the new ones face to face. There's only a couple of millimeters actually gone from these, which if the discs hadn't been so badly lipped we couldn't reuse them because they were well underneath the minimum thickness, we could have just left this and put the old disc back on. But alas, we cannot. So we need to open up the caliper. I'm going to use this tool. I got this off Wish. They do kick around pretty much everywhere these days. Last up, doing up the hub nut. So we just need to gun this on, then we can put it on the ground and torque it all to spec. So the torque spec for this is actually a little bit vague. In the SsangYong service manual it says this nut, yes, it should be replaced every single time. I will eventually end up replacing one of these, I guess. But it's between 200 and 240 Newton meters, which seems like a really wide spread. So I'm going to go to 210, which is the most my torque wrench will do. And hopefully, now we've got Chris standing on the brakes, which I kind of forgot we now have functioning brakes we can actually do that with, I can just tighten this up before we put the wheels on. Yep, I'd say that's tight enough. Now, it's so dark, I'm going to pack it in on video, and we'll come back to this another day, do the rear brakes, and then this thing should be ready to go. So on to the last corner of the car. I cheated just a little bit by doing the other side ahead of time to give myself a little bit of a heads up, once again, on how to do drum brakes, because the handbrake on this car is a drum brake inside the rotor. We need to put new rotors on and new pads in here, but I'm really hopeful that I can get away with using the existing drum brakes that are in here, because I hate dealing with them, I hate dismantling them, and even taking them apart like this is one of my least favourite things to do. Nothing compared to a CV joint, but this is definitely in the top 5. So something I forgot to do on the other side at first was to release the adjuster. This expands the brake shoes as they wear, but as you wear a lip into the disc, that means that those shoes sit behind the level of the disc, the level of the drum, albeit in this case it is actually a disc, and when you try to remove it, you get stuck on those drum shoes in there, and that's really problematic, as I discovered when I did the other side. Well, when you park this up, make sure that you have the wheels in the right position, or the battery connected at least, because I have neither of those things, so I'm just going to try and be lucky, take these screws out, get the caliper off, and try and shimmy this disc off. But realistically, you should try and bring the pads all the way in, and then adjust them back out again afterwards. We'll see how lucky we're going to get. Now on the back of here, there are two 17mm bolts that hold the carrier on. You can't get a socket onto them easily because the drop link is right in the way, which is really irritating, so I'm going to have to use a ring spanner and take this off the old-fashioned way. I'm also going to take the caliper carrier bolts out because we can't get the pads out without having the carrier and the caliper separate from one another. And undoing these bolts, much like the problem we had on the front, it's going to be a lot easier to do it whilst it's all mounted to the mass of the vehicle to work against, rather than trying to hold it in the hand, and it's just going to be a fight. So we'll get those off, and once it's all in pieces, we'll come back. See on this pad where it was down to metal on metal, and I think by the time we get to look at the back of the disc, oh, it did actually come off nicely as well. Yeah, you can see where the back of this has been really badly chewed up. In fact, the edges of it are actually flaking off. That's how bad it is. Wow, yeah, that was definitely done for. Well, let's start putting all of this stuff back together. trying to put this carrier back on, hopefully you can see the problem with this bolt where it is stuck right behind this drop link, and this is a really dumb design, but it doesn't give you enough room to actually get a socket on the back, which is why you have to use a ratchet spanner, which, as I say, is really irritating. And now we find a consequential problem of having run this down to metal on metal. My piston retraction tool, this little spreader that goes in, does not fit, even on its narrowest setting, which is actually about there. It won't go any further in. It's only about 1 millimeter off, but it will not fit between the piston and the outside of the caliper. So I'm going to have to go and get a different tool to try and push this in. It's a little more difficult to work with. It's nowhere as easy as this one. So I'm just going to squeeze this in enough until I can get that tool in, and we'll go from there. But annoying, and another reason why you shouldn't run your discs low and your pads down to metal on metal, as if it wasn't already obvious enough. So this is the other type of brake retraction tool that I have. This one winds the caliper back in. So if you have a ratcheting handbrake mechanism on the back, i.e. not drums inside the disc, this will wind that caliper back in so that it will reset the self-adjustment for the new pad, the new disc and everything else. That will also push a lot of fluid out of here back into the system, so it's worthwhile taking the cap off the reservoir and checking the level. Otherwise you're going to overflow the system, put it way above max. It'll fill back in a little bit, but you're probably going to have to take out some of that fluid, particularly if it was topped up to the max before you started doing brakes all round like we have. So this one fits in here, and it just winds in. Now it has an awful lot less torque that you can apply because of this tiny little handle, although it does have a socket on the end. It's generally just a little bit more awkward than a nice easy to use ratcheting mechanism on that one. So I've just pushed that in a little bit. I can take this one back off. This one should fit in there now. And that's so much easier to deal with. And this should just pop this all the way back in. Like that. Dead easy. And that should be everything done. I've readjusted this so that it just barely drags. That's apparently the way you can tell that they're adjusted, is to just make them drag a tiny bit on the disc, which is obviously a little bit difficult with it still in gear, but it shouldn't impede the wheel. It should just say drag on the inside of the drum, and then you back it off a tiny bit from there and it will self-adjust into where it needs to be. So that's all done. This is back on. We haven't tested the brakes yet to pump the fluid back into the caliper that it needs to actually push this through, but we'll do that in a minute once we've got this back on the ground. Put the wheel on, and then we're all good. I lied, there is one more thing I need to do. I pinched all of the nuts up and knocked the little tabs in on here off camera, but I do still need to put a cotter pin through, and that's what arrived this morning. So this goes through the back of here and locks this in place. Just put that over there and then snip the end of this off, which watch these pliers now not be able to. Oh no, it did. Cool. Now we're done. And that should have been everything. That should actually have been everything we needed to do to take this down, get it inspected and get an MOT certificate. But it wasn't. Two things came up. One of my own doing. When I brought this down off the axle stands, I used the jacking point just down here, and when I did it, I caved the cylinder and put it on the axle stand. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. But once I put the jack underneath it, something was unhappy and it just started folding, and unfortunately that is a major fail, not only because it's the sill, but because there is a suspension mounting component, the trailing arm, right next to that. It's within 30 centimeters, and that is a problem, and that meant I had to get this whole thing redone. Now I can take this on the road for repairs and an MOT. So it was booked in for MOT repairs down at Car Savers, and I drove it down there, and we managed to get this fixed. They managed to turn it around in about 2 days, which is fantastic. So this all got replaced, and this is now rock solid. It is black because I basically said to them, don't worry about painting it. I've got some body colour paint for touching up the handles and doing a couple of other little bits on this. I will do it later. Obviously, I have not had a chance to do it. We'll wait and see if it actually gets through the MOT before we start doing anything cosmetic. But this will be fine for the time being. The other problem, after I'd had that done, when I started editing the video, I noticed something, and maybe you noticed it as well when you've just been watching through me doing those brakes. I took the disc and I guess drum off, and I had a look and I inspected it, but I didn't really pay much attention to the shoes. I just kind of assumed that they would be fine, the same as the other side, which had plenty of meat left on it, and there was nothing. The shoe material is completely gone. Nothing there whatsoever. I've looked through it a couple of times, and unfortunately, with an ineffective handbrake, even if we only have one side across the axle, it's going to fail. So I need to put shoes on the back as well. We're just ticking things off the list and then adding new ones onto it once again. Now I'm not going to put you through doing the brakes on this yet again. I hate doing drums with a passion, so I'm just going to slam through and get that done once the parts arrive. We've got a bit of time before Rustival, so hopefully they are all going to turn up and I'm going to be able to get this done, MOT'd and what have you, in time for that. And when this goes out, you may or seen whatever else we take. It vehicle to Rustival of my own, I managed to break it and something goes wrong. Interestingly, both times that's happened with the GTO and this, it's both been brakes, and it's both been rear brakes as well, which is kind of weird. But yeah, that's not to say that Rustival is the cause of my failing brakes, but it's just a weird coincidence. So this is all dealt with. I need to get the shoes fitted onto the rear axle, and might as well do both sides, even though the other ones were okay. Get them both done and everything will be fine. However, there is one other thing that has become apparent, which I'm not going to have to do for the MOT, I don't think. We'll see whether or not it comes up, but I am going to have to address, and that's at the front on the suspension that we've already fixed. When I put this back together, I used a Rexton spring because I could not find or easily get hold of, for a reasonable price or lead time, the correct spring for this. And I mentioned in the previous video how we were kind of hedging with a slightly longer spring and what was listed as being roughly the same diameter. And I kind of hedged on the fact that that would be okay. It is not, in fact, okay. This is sitting at least an inch lower than the other side, and you can see that the strength of the spring in this side is nowhere near the same as the other. So I am now on the lookout for another spring to refit onto this side, and in the meantime it's going to have a little bit of softness on this corner. We have got some good plans for this in the near future, so I am going to have to address this corner in this spring, but yeah, that's a little bit frustrating, especially considering I actually bought 2 of those springs to do the other side just in case it needed it. As it turned out, it didn't. It already had the correct spring on, and now I'm going to have to do this side twice. So I suppose if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing twice. Once with the brakes and now again at the front. So never mind. But if you'd like to follow when we do that, when we fix up the front, and when we get the MOT sorted with those brakes at the back, you should subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop a comment if you know where I can easily get hold of one of these springs for this. Not the Rexton one, a legit Rodius one in the UK. That would be fantastic. If you want to support us in all of our other builds, predominantly the kit car, in inverted commas, the low cost round the corner, you can support us at patreon.com/pedalbox show. You can also buy merch, which is available at shop.pedalbox.show. I'm actually wearing some of it for a change, and if you are a patron, you also get discount at the merch shop as well. So join us in the next episode, which might be working on one of the other cars, possibly a road trip from Rustival with or without this, depending on whether or not the MOT gets sorted and I can get all of the fixes done before then. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much for watching.